December 13th, 1943, 09:27 hours, 12,000 feet above the Assam Valley, British India. Second Lieutenant Dwight Kellerman looked down through the scratched plexiglass canopy of his P-40 Warhawk and realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. Not the kind you apologize for at the officers' club, the kind that gets measured in body counts and congressional inquiries. 64 Japanese aircraft were heading straight for Dinjan Airfield, 24 twin-engine bombers flying in 3 perfect V formations, each bomber carrying 1,500 pounds of high-explosive ordnance. Wrapped around them like angry hornets, 40 sleek fighters weaved in protective S patterns, their polished cowlings flashing in the morning sun. The formation was still 11 miles out, closing at 180 miles per hour. That gave Kellerman exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds before they reached the airfield. He was alone. No wingman, no squadron, no cavalry riding over the hill. Just one obsolete fighter, one young pilot who had overslept, and a decision that would either save 280 lives or add his name to a very long list of men who died doing something spectacularly stupid. Kellerman's hands moved across the instrument panel by muscle memory. Fuel gauge 73 gallons. At cruise power, that was 90 minutes of flying time. At combat power, maybe 65. Ammunition counter 2,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition loaded in 6 wing-mounted Browning M2 machine guns. He did the math. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute. All 6 guns together threw 4,800 rounds downrange every 60 seconds. That was 80 rounds per second. His 2 400-round combat load would last exactly 30 seconds of continuous fire. But 30 seconds of sustained fire would melt the gun barrels, overheat the receivers, turn the wing guns into useless scrap metal. Practical firing time in combat bursts 12 to 15 seconds total. Maybe 6 good attack passes if he was surgical about trigger discipline. 12 seconds to stop 64 enemy aircraft. The math was not encouraging. 8 weeks earlier, on October 25th, the Japanese had perfected a brutal tactic over northeast India. Show up at first light when the airfields were still waking up, catch the transports on the ground, burn everything that could not scramble fast enough to matter. At Chabua Airfield, 90 miles north, they had executed it with surgical precision. 47 C-47 transport planes destroyed before their engines even started. 112 men killed, mechanics, loadmasters, wounded soldiers waiting for evacuation. Most of them never heard the bombers until the first 500-pound bomb detonated in the fuel dump. This morning, Dinjan was next on the list. Below Kellerman's left wing, 14 C-47 Skytrains sat parked in 2 neat rows beside the main runway. Each transport carried 20 wounded American soldiers, men who had survived Japanese artillery in the Hukaung Valley, men who had beaten malaria, dysentery, and jungle rot, men who had clawed their way through hell itself to reach this airfield, only to find themselves strapped into aluminum coffins, waiting for bombs they could not see coming. 280 lives. 280 men going home. 280 families waiting for telegrams that would say, arrived safely, instead of regret to inform. Beyond the transports sat the reason Dinjan mattered. The fuel depot, 55,000 gallons of 100-octane aviation gasoline stacked in 55-gallon drums, like dominoes waiting for a match. That fuel was the lifeblood of the Hump airlift, the aerial supply line that kept China in the war. If those drums caught fire, the entire China-Burma-India theater would feel it within 72 hours. Chiang Kai-shek's armies would run out of ammunition. The Japanese would push west. The war would shift. Standing between all of that and 64 enemy aircraft was one 23-year-old pilot from Dayton, Ohio, who had committed the unforgivable sin of sleeping through his alarm. Kellerman had not planned to be the hero this morning. He had planned to sleep until 800, eat a hot breakfast for once, maybe write a letter to his father back at the Wright brothers' factory. The night before, he had volunteered to take overnight alert duty, giving a break to Lieutenant Morrison, whose wife had just delivered twin boys in California. Morrison had shown everyone the telegram 4 times. Seemed like the decent thing to do. Let the new father get some rest. Decent had turned catastrophic at 08:57 hours when the scramble bell started ringing. Kellerman had jerked awake in the alert shack, boots still on flight suit, half zipped. Through the window, he watched the entire squadron launch without him. 12 P-40s clawing into the sky, pilots running to their aircraft with parachutes flapping. The duty officer was screaming into the radio. Radar had picked up a large formation approaching from the northeast, bearing 045, speed 180 knots, distance 60 miles, standard intercept procedure, get airborne, establish altitude, meet them 50 miles out before they reached the airfield. By the time Kellerman stumbled outside, rubbing sleep from his eyes, the sky was empty except for prop wash and exhaust smoke. The squadron was already 5 miles north and climbing. Then the duty officer's radio crackled again. Different voice, British accent. Radar station at Lido. Dinjan Tower, be advised, second formation detected, bearing 090, distance 40 miles, altitude 9,000, speed 180 knots. Count 20 plus bombers, 40 plus escorts. First formation was a feint. Repeat, first formation was a feint. The duty officer went white, grabbed the radio. All War Dog flights, new vector 090 bandits, inbound from due east, authenticate December. Static. Then a voice crackling with distance and frustration. War Dog lead copies. We're 70 miles north, bus to fuel state. Minimum 38 minutes to return and engage. Authenticate December Delta 13. 38 minutes. The bombers would hit their target in 12, drop their ordnance, turn for home, be gone in 20. By the time the squadron arrived, Dinjan would be a smoking crater and those 14 transports would be burning funeral pyres. The duty officer looked at Kellerman, then looked at the flight line. 1 P-40E Warhawk sat alone on the hard stand, fueled and armed. Tail number 227, nose, art, painted in fading yellow letters, Iron Maiden. Lieutenant, that's your bird. She's the only aircraft on the ground with fuel and ammunition. Kellerman stared at Iron Maiden. She was not much to look at. A P-40E-1 of the older variants, built in early 1942, back when the Army Air Forces still believed the Warhawk could dogfight Zeros on equal terms. 2 years of combat experience had taught them otherwise. The P-40 was heavy, sluggish in turns, outdated. She topped out at 362 miles per hour in level flight and struggled to climb past 25,000 feet. But she was tough. The Allison 5-171039 liquid-cooled engine could absorb punishment that would kill lighter fighters. The airframe was built like a tank, and those 650 caliber Browning M2 machine guns could shred anything they hit, if you could get close enough to hit it. The crew chief was already waiting by the wing, Master Sergeant Wallace McBride, 45 years old, born in Glasgow, Scotland, immigrated to New York in 1922, spent 23 years keeping aircraft alive despite the best efforts of young pilots to destroy them. His face was weathered leather. His hands were scarred from hot metal and sharp edges. His voice carried the thick rumble of Scotland, even after 2 decades in America. Laddie McBride said, his tone flat as concrete. Your squadron went north chasing ghosts. Radar just confirmed the real formation coming from the east. 24 Sally bombers, 40 Oscar escorts. They'll be overhead in 12 minutes. Kellerman stared at him. 12 minutes? Aye. And you're the only aircraft on the flight line with fuel and ammunition. 73 gallons in the tanks, 2,400 rounds in the guns. Coolant's topped, oil pressure's good. She'll fly. McBride paused. Whether you should is a different question entirely. Kellerman walked around Iron Maiden, running his hand along the battered fuselage. She had history. 3 previous pilots, all dead. Lieutenant Harris, killed over Mitkina in April. Captain Rodriguez, shot down in June. Lieutenant Chen burned to death when his P-40 caught fire on takeoff in August. The ground crews called her cursed. The superstitious ones refused to work on her. McBride didn't believe in curses. He believed in maintenance schedules and proper pre-flight checks. Iron Maiden flew because he kept her flying. The pilots died because war kills pilots. That was the math. Army Air Force's doctrine is very clear on this, laddie, McBride said, climbing up on the wing to check the ammunition feed one last time. Don't engage if you're outnumbered more than 5 to 1. You'll be outnumbered 64 to 1. Nobody will court-martial you for shadowing them and radioing their position. That's the smart play. Kellerman looked past McBride toward the flight line. Through the open cargo doors of the nearest C-47, he could see medics loading wounded men on stretchers. Men with bandaged heads, men missing arms, men missing legs, men who had already given everything the war could take and were just trying to make it home to families who were counting days until the telegram arrived. How long until the squadron gets back? Kellerman asked. Minimum 38 minutes if they turn around right now and run full combat power. More likely 42 if they want any fuel left to engage. Kellerman did the math. The bombers would reach Dinjan in 12 minutes, drop their bombs, 36 500-pound bombs and 72 100-pound incendiaries. The transports would burn, the fuel depot would detonate, the airfield would cease to exist, the bombers would turn for home by minute 18, the squadron would arrive at minute 42 to find wreckage and bodies. Unless someone slowed the bombers down, unless someone broke their formation, unless someone made them think twice about pressing the attack, unless someone did something monumentally stupid in the next 3 minutes. Kellerman pulled himself into the cockpit. The seat was still warm from the morning sun. The leather was cracked and patched. The instrument panel was a mix of original gauges and field replacements. Some needles stuck, some didn't work at all. But the ones that mattered, airspeed, altitude, fuel oil, pressure, coolant temperature, those worked. McBride leaned into the cockpit, his weathered face serious. "Laddie, I have been keeping aircraft flying since before you were born. I've seen brave pilots and I've seen stupid pilots. The brave ones sometimes come back. The stupid ones never do." He paused. "You're about to do something stupid. I can see it in your eyes. So I'm going to ask you one question and I want an honest answer. Why?" Kellerman looked at the C-47s, looked at the wounded men, looked at the fuel depot that kept China in the war, looked at the sky where 64 enemy aircraft were closing at 3 miles per minute. "Because if I don't, 280 men die. And I'm the only one here who can do something about it." McBride stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Aye, that's the right answer. Not the smart answer, but the right one." He stepped back from the cockpit. "Fuel's at 73 gallons. Gives you 90 minutes at cruise 65 at combat power. Ammunition's 2,400 rounds. Use it in bursts, or you'll cook the guns. Coolant and oil are topped. Engine's been running rough, but she'll hold together if you don't abuse her too badly." McBride paused. His voice dropped. "One more thing. 6 months ago I installed something on Iron Maiden. Not exactly regulation, not exactly approved by the engineering manuals." He pointed to a small red-painted valve near the base of the instrument panel. "Emergency coolant injection system. If the engine's dying from overheat and you're out of options, pull that valve. It'll inject hydraulic fluid directly into the coolant system. Might buy you 90 seconds of extra engine life." "Hydraulic fluid?" "Aye, same system that powers your landing gear and flaps. You pull that valve, you lose hydraulic pressure permanently. No landing gear, no flaps. You'll be doing a belly landing when you get home, if you get home." Beatty and Kellerman stared at the red valve. "So I can save the engine or land safely. Not both. That's the choice. But a dead engine 40 miles from base means you're not landing anywhere except jungle. At least this gives you a chance to make it back before you have to worry about the landing." McBride stepped back from the wing. "You're cool, laddie, but if you pull that valve, you'd better make it count." Kellerman began the startup checklist. Mixture rich, throttle cracked 1 inch, fuel selector to main tank, magnetos to both, battery on, the familiar ritual, the muscle memory that every pilot develops, the sequence that turns a collection of metal and fuel into something that defies gravity. He hit the starter. The Allison 5171039 coughed once, belched black smoke, caught. The 12-cylinder engine settled into a rough idle that shook the entire airframe. 150 horsepower waiting to be unleashed. The propeller blades became a blur. McBride stepped back from the wing and raised one hand. Not the crisp military salute, the slow, deliberate kind. The kind you give someone you respect, the kind you give someone you don't expect to see again. Kellerman returned it. Then he released the brakes and shoved the throttle forward. The Allison roared. The P-40 lurched forward, tail coming up as speed built. The rough dirt strip blurred beneath him. 50 miles per hour, 60, 70, at 90 miles per hour, Kellerman pulled back on the stick. Iron Maiden clawed into the sky, trailing black exhaust and the smell of burning oil. The climb rate was not impressive. The P-40E was heavy, underpowered, by modern standards built for a different kind of war. She gained altitude slowly, grudgingly, like she resented being asked to fly at all. Kellerman kept the nose up, trading speed for height, watching the altimeter needle crawl upward. 2,000 feet, 4,000, 6,000. At 8,000 feet, he spotted them. The Japanese formation was exactly where the radar had said it would be. 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally heavy bombers, twin-engine aircraft with greenhouse canopies and dorsal gun turrets. They flew in 3 V formations of 8 aircraft each. Neat, professional, confident. Above and below them, 40 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters wove lazy S patterns. The Oscars were small, nimble, beautiful in their own lethal way, designed for dogfighting. Empty weight, 3,483 pounds, almost half the weight of a P-40. Powered by a Nakajima Ha-115 radial engine, producing 1,150 horsepower. Maximum speed, 329 miles per hour. They could turn inside anything the Americans flew, could sustain 6.5 G-turns without the wings tearing off, could outmaneuver, outturn, outclimb almost any Allied fighter in a dogfight. In a turning fight, an Oscar would shred a P-40 in 30 seconds. Kellerman had no intention of turning with them. The P-40E Warhawk weighed 6,200 pounds, empty 8,400 pounds, loaded for combat. Same horsepower as the Oscar, but 78% heavier. That weight was a curse in a dogfight. But in a dive it was a gift from physics. Heavy objects fall faster, build speed faster. In a steep dive, a P-40 could hit 480 miles per hour. The Oscar's wings would structurally fail above 350. If an Oscar tried to follow a P-40 straight down, it would disintegrate. That was the playbook for P-40 pilots in the China-Burma-India theater. Boom and zoom, dive attack, extend, never turn, never slow down, use altitude and gravity to build speed, hit hard and get out before the enemy could react. The problem was that playbook assumed you had a squadron, 8 or 12 fighters working together, taking turns diving through the formation, keeping the enemy off balance, covering each other's exits. Kellerman had himself 1 pass, maybe 2 if the enemy was slow to react. Then the Oscars would have position and altitude, and no amount of diving would save him once they were on his tail. He needed to make the first pass count. Army Air Force's doctrine for fighter pilots was very clear. When outnumbered more than 5 to 1, disengage, shadow the enemy, report their position and heading, preserve your aircraft, live to fight another day. Kellerman was outnumbered 64 to 1. The doctrine did not have a category for that. The doctrine assumed anyone in that situation was already dead. He thought about McBride's salute, thought about the 14 C-47s sitting on the ground like ducks in a shooting gallery, thought about his father, who had spent 33 years building engines at the Wright brothers factory in Dayton, who had taught Kellerman that machines only fail when the men operating them quit first. Kellerman pushed the throttle to the firewall and pulled back on the stick. The Allison engine howled. The airspeed bled off as the nose came up. The P-40 clawed for altitude, slower now, trading forward velocity for vertical climb. Kellerman needed height. The attack had to come from above. Gravity and surprise were the only advantages he had against 64 aircraft. At 12,000 feet, he was level with the formation. At 14,000, he was above them. At 16,000 feet, 4,000 feet above the bomber stream, he leveled off and took stock. The enemy formation droned along beneath him. Neat, confident, nobody looked up. Success breeds complacency. The Japanese had been running these dawn raids for 2 months. Every single mission had gone exactly according to plan. Minimal resistance, bombs on target, home in time for breakfast. This one was about to go differently. Kellerman studied the formation. 3 V groups of 8 bombers each. The lead formation was the key. 6 bombers in a tight V with 2 more stepped up behind. They would be carrying the Pathfinder crews, the experienced bombardiers, who would mark the target for the following waves. Knock out the leaders, break the formation, ruin the bomb run. The Oscars could wait. They would get their turn soon enough. Kellerman's hands were steady on the controls. His breathing was calm. Fear was there, sitting in his chest, like a cold stone, making his heart beat faster than it should. But fear was just chemistry, adrenaline and cortisol and evolutionary biology. It did not get a vote. He rolled the P-40 inverted and looked down through the canopy at the formation below. From this angle he could see everything, the spacing between aircraft, the gaps in the escort pattern, the blind spots in the defensive coverage. He picked his entry point. A corridor of empty sky between 2 Oscar flights. a gap that would be open for maybe 5 seconds before the fighters cycled back into position. Kellerman took one slow breath. Then he pushed the stick forward and dove. The P-40 fell out of the sky like it had been kicked by an angry god. The airspeed indicator climbed. 200 miles per hour, 250, 300. The wind screamed around the canopy, a rising shriek that drowned out the engine. Gravity pressed him down into the seat with the weight of a fat man sitting on his chest. The Allison engine roared, propeller blades spinning so fast they vanished into invisibility. 350 miles per hour, 360. The wings began to shake. The airframe groaned, protesting every rivet and weld, stressed beyond design limits. The control stick went stiff in his hands, requiring real muscle to move as the air loads built up. The world narrowed to a tunnel. At the end of that tunnel were 6 Japanese bombers that had no idea what was coming. At 800 yards, Kellerman centered the lead bomber in his gun sight, squeezed the trigger. 6 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns opened fire simultaneously. The recoil was immediate and violent. The entire airplane shuddered like a jackhammer. The cockpit filled with noise, a rapid hammering that overwhelmed even the engine roar. Spent casings ejected from the wing gun ports, tumbling away in the slipstream. Tracers reached out across the sky every 5th round, burning bright orange as it tore through the air at 2,900 feet per second. The stream of fire converged on the lead bomber's left wing. Fabric tore, metal sparked, pieces flew off the wing in a spray of debris. Then the port engine caught fire. Not a small fire, not a smoke trail. A blooming orange fireball that engulfed the entire engine, cowling in less than a second. The bomber did not like being on fire. The pilot yanked the controls hard left, trying to side-slip away from the flames. But the airplane was too heavy, too slow, carrying too much ordnance. The wing dipped, the nose dropped. The aircraft rolled left, directly into the path of its wingman. The wingman saw it coming, hauled back on his controls, dropped his bomb load early in a desperate attempt to gain altitude. The bombs tumbled away, falling uselessly into jungle, 40 miles from any target. The formation exploded. Not literally, but tactically it ceased to exist. Aircraft broke left and right. Pilots hauling on control yokes, bombers scattering in every direction like startled birds. Perfect V formation dissolved into chaos in less than 3 seconds. Precision bombing became survival flying. Kellerman had fired for exactly 2 seconds. At 80 rounds per second, that was 160 rounds expended. He had 2,240 rounds remaining, 14 seconds of ammunition at sustained fire. 7 or 8 more attack passes if he was careful. He pulled back hard on the stick. 7 Gs crushed him into the seat. Blood drained from his head toward his feet. Vision grayed at the edges, tunneling toward blackness. His G-suit bladders inflated, squeezing his legs and abdomen, trying to keep blood in his brain. The P-40 groaned in protest, metal flexing wings bending upward under the aerodynamic load. The dive reversed into a climb. The nose came up. Airspeed bled off rapidly as potential energy traded back for altitude. And 40 Japanese fighters realized they had a serious problem. Because they were not escorting bombers anymore, they were chasing a very angry American who had just ruined their entire morning, and that American was already looking for his next target. The sky stopped being empty. Oscars rolled in from above and behind wings, glinting in the morning sun, sleek, fast, deadly. The kind of fighters that loved nothing more than chewing up heavy American aircraft that made the mistake of slowing down in a dogfight. Kellerman knew exactly one rule about fighting Oscars: never turn with them, ever. The P-40 was faster in a straight line, tougher, heavier, better armed. But the Oscars were dancers. They could turn inside anything. If Kellerman tried to dogfight, he would lose, fast, badly, terminally. 4 Oscars came down from his 10 o'clock high diving to intercept. Kellerman could see the pilots now close enough to make out the dark shapes in the cockpit's faces, hidden behind leather helmets and oxygen masks. He rolled left, snapped the nose up 30 degrees, and fired a 1-second burst, 20 rounds down range. The tracers went wide, missing by 50 feet. He was not trying to hit them. He was trying to make them react. They reacted. The lead Oscar broke hard, right wingman following automatically. Textbook defensive split. Get out of the line of fire. Regroup. Come back for another pass. That gave Kellerman exactly 4 seconds. He immediately shoved the nose down and dove away, trading his hard-won altitude for speed. The P-40 surged forward, accelerating rapidly as gravity took over. 380 miles per hour. 390, 400. The Oscars tried to follow, rolling into the dive, noses dropping, but their lighter airframes could not build speed as fast. Physics was undefeated. At 400 miles per hour, Kellerman was pulling away, opening the gap from 200 yards to 400, then 600. That bought him seconds, not safety, not survival, just seconds. But seconds were enough. Behind him, the bomber formation was trying to pull itself back together, aircraft climbing back to formation altitude, tightening spacing, reforming the V-groups, like nothing had happened, like they had not just watched their lead aircraft catch fire and spiral out of control. Professional, disciplined, determined, Kellerman glanced at his fuel gauge. 70 gallons. He had been at combat power for 4 minutes. The Allison was drinking fuel at a gallon per minute. At this rate, he had an hour left, maybe less. He glanced at his ammunition counter. 240 rounds remaining. Still 11 seconds of sustained fire if he used it all in one burst. But that would cook the gun barrels. Better to use it in controlled 2-second bursts. Another 6 or 7 attacks. He looked down at the airfield. Dinjan was 9 miles behind him now. The bombers were 6 miles from their release point. 2 minutes until bombs away. 2 minutes to ruin their aim. 2 minutes to scatter them again. 2 minutes to make them believe this airfield was defended by more than one obsolete fighter and a pilot too stubborn to quit. Kellerman shoved the throttle forward again and dove back toward the bombers. 8 Oscars followed him down close enough now that he could see the red circles on their wings, the Japanese national insignia bright against the polished aluminum. The P-40 screamed through the dive, hitting 410 miles per hour. The controls went stiff. The stick felt like it was set in concrete. At these speeds, the aerodynamic forces on the control surfaces were enormous. Moving the stick required real physical strength. The Oscars fell behind again. Their lighter construction limited their dive speed. At 380 miles per hour, they were already pushing their structural limits. At 410, the P-40 was pulling away effortlessly. Kellerman leveled out at bomber altitude and lined up on the right-hand formation. 8 sallies in a stepped V, their greenhouse canopies glinting. He could see the dorsal gunners swinging their weapons toward him. 7.7mm machine guns, short range, slow rate of fire, not enough to stop him before he was in range. 300 yards, 250. The gunners opened fire. Tracers reached out, falling short, arcing down beneath his nose. 200 yards. Kellerman fired. A 2-second burst, 160 rounds. The tracers converged on the lead bomber's starboard engine. The radial engine exploded in a spectacular fireball. Pieces of the cowling flew off like shrapnel. The propeller disintegrated. The bomber rolled violently to the right. The wingman saw it coming, yanked hard left. The 2 aircraft missed each other by less than 20 feet. The formation shattered again. Kellerman kicked right rudder and sprayed another 1-second burst through a bomber's thin fuselage. 80 rounds. He saw impacts, saw fabric tear, saw something inside the fuselage explode in a flash of orange. Then the Oscars were back. Tracers snapped past his canopy so close he could hear them over the engine noise. Sharp cracks, supersonic bullets displacing air. He felt impacts, dull thuds against the fuselage behind him, more rounds punching through the thin aluminum skin. The control stick went slightly softer in his right hand. Damage, cable tension reduced. Not critical, not yet. The sky was chaos now, smoke trails, fire, fighters everywhere, bombers scattering, and somehow impossibly one American P-40 still in the middle of it all, refusing to leave, refusing to quit. Kellerman was not winning. The bombers were still flying, the Oscars were still dangerous, the odds had not changed. But he was making sure nobody else was winning either. That was when the airplane started complaining. He felt it before he saw it. A vibration in the control stick, a shudder through the airframe. Then the engine temperature gauge began to climb, past the green normal zone into the yellow caution zone, toward the red danger zone. He had been running war emergency power for 14 minutes straight. The Allison 5171039 was rated for 5 minutes of maximum power. Maybe 8, if you were lucky. 14 minutes was asking for miracles. The temperature gauge read 235 degrees Fahrenheit. The red line was 221. At 235, coolant was beginning to boil inside the engine block. Pistons were expanding against cylinder walls. Bearings were running hot. Metal was grinding against metal in ways the Allison engineers never intended, but the bombers were still coming. Still 7 miles from Dinjan, still carrying their bombs, still capable of turning the airfield into a smoking crater. Kellerman looked at the red emergency coolant valve, McBride's gift. 90 seconds of extra engine life in exchange for hydraulic pressure. No landing gear, belly landing guaranteed. Not yet. He was not ready to make that choice. Not while he still had altitude and airspeed and ammunition. He shoved the nose down and dove through the escort screen one more time. The P-40 accelerated past 390 miles per hour, shaking hard now, the airframe protesting every mile per hour above 350. He leveled out and fired at the center formation. 1.5 second burst. 120 rounds. The bomber's right wing folded at the root, just crumpled like cardboard. The aircraft flipped inverted and spun, tumbling through the sky, trailing smoke and debris. No parachutes. Too low, too fast. 3 bombers confirmed destroyed. 21 still flying. The formation broke again. But this time they did not reform. This time they turned south. The raid was over. The attack was aborted. Every bomber jettisoning ordnance and heading for home at maximum speed. Dinjan was safe. Mission accomplished. Now Kellerman just had to get home. He turned the P-40 west toward Dinjan. The airfield was visible now, a brown scar in the jungle, 40 miles away. At 160 miles per hour, that was 15 minutes of flying time. Behind him, the engine temperature gauge climbed past 240 degrees. The needle crept toward 250. Kellerman looked at the red valve again. Not yet. The P-40 kept flying. The engine kept running, grinding metal, boiling coolant, destroying itself one revolution at a time. 40 miles to go, 15 minutes. The engine had maybe 5 minutes left before it seized. The math was not encouraging, but quitting was not on the checklist. The engine fire did not care that the mission was over. Kellerman smelled it first. Burning metal, burning coolant. That sweet, sickly odor of ethylene glycol vaporizing at temperatures it was never designed to reach. Then smoke crept into the cockpit, thin at first, just wisps curling up from behind the instrument panel. Then thicker, enough to sting his eyes. The Allison Fire 1710 was running on borrowed time, and it knew it. Oil pressure dropped to 18 pounds per square inch, then 15, then 12. The engine was supposed to seize at 10. Every second it kept running past that threshold was a minor miracle or a major malfunction, depending on how you looked at it. The propeller began to shudder unevenly, like it was deciding whether today was the day it simply stopped caring and fell off. Airspeed bled away. 180 miles per hour, 170, 160. The jungle below looked very patient, very permanent. The kind of place where airplanes went to become aluminum skeletons covered in vines. 6 Oscars followed him, circling above like sharks that had already decided dessert could wait. They were not attacking anymore, just watching, waiting for the inevitable. 1 Oscar slid in close, so close Kellerman could see the pilot's face through the canopy. Young, maybe younger than Kellerman, dark eyes behind goggles, leather helmet, oxygen mask. The Japanese pilot pointed downward with one gloved hand. The gesture was unmistakable. Land, bail out, surrender, live. Kellerman ignored him and kept flying. The pilot held position for another 10 seconds, then peeled away, rejoining his formation. They climbed to 8,000 feet and held station, following Kellerman like mourners at a funeral that had not happened yet. 35 miles to Dinjan. At 150 miles per hour, that was 14 minutes of flight time. The engine had maybe 4 minutes left before it seized completely. The math was not encouraging. Then the cockpit filled with smoke, not from the engine this time. From behind the instrument panel, electrical fire, wiring insulation burning, another thing Kellerman did not need, added to his list of immediate problems. His eyes burned, his throat closed. Breathing became a choice between smoke inhalation and hypoxia. He slid the canopy open 6 inches and the wind ripped the smoke out in a violent stream. It also nearly ripped his head off. At 150 miles per hour, the slipstream was a physical force trying to peel his helmet back. Kellerman cranked the canopy open another foot and let the wind do its work. The smoke cleared. Cold air blasted into the cockpit. His eyes watered. But he could see again. He could breathe. 30 miles to go. Oil pressure at 10 pounds per square inch. Temperature gauge long gone melted into slag. the engine vibrating like a washing machine, trying to shake itself apart. At 4,000 feet, something snapped. Not in the engine, in the airframe. The right aileron went limp, just stopped responding. Kellerman felt it through the control stick, that sudden absence of resistance, like pushing on a door that was no longer there. The P-40 rolled hard right and pitched down. Kellerman pulled back on the stick. Nothing happened. The elevator cables were gone, cut clean through, probably by one of the rounds that had punched through the fuselage 10 minutes earlier. The airplane had officially stopped listening. The nose dropped. Airspeed climbed. 180, 200, 220. The jungle rushed up like it had somewhere important to be and was running late. Kellerman had seconds, maybe 10, maybe 5. The P-40 was in a descending spiral, picking up speed, and there was nothing he could do to stop it because the controls did not work anymore. Physics was in charge now, and physics did not negotiate. Then something clicked, not in the airplane, in his head. The damage was forcing the nose down when the aircraft was right side up. The severed cables, the limp aileron, the airflow over the damaged control surfaces, all of it was conspiring to push the nose toward the ground. But aerodynamics did not care about orientation. Forces reversed when you flipped the aircraft. Positive G became negative G, down became up. If the controls were killing him upright, maybe they would save him upside down. It was not a good idea. It was barely an idea at all. But it was the only idea Kellerman had, and the ground was 1,800 feet away and closing fast. At 1,600 feet, Kellerman rolled the P-40 inverted. Negative G slammed him into the shoulder straps. Blood rushed to his head. The engine coughed, starved for fuel, as the carburetor fought against gravity. Then somehow it caught again and kept running. And just like that, the nose came up. Not much, not enough to climb, but enough to slow the descent. The P-40 was flying upside down at 140 miles per hour, losing altitude at 800 feet per minute instead of 2,000. Kellerman hung in the straps, vision already tunneling red from the blood pressure in his head. This was not sustainable. The human body was not designed to fly inverted for more than a few seconds. Blood pooled in the brain, vision degraded, consciousness became optional, but right side up, the airplane dove into the ground. Upside down it flew, badly, barely. But it flew, so Kellerman did the only thing that made sense. He kept flipping. Inverted for 8 seconds, climb slightly, or at least descend less, then roll upright for 6 seconds to let fuel feed the engine and let blood drain from his head. Then inverted again, over and over. It was lunatic. It was desperate. It was working. The Oscars above watched this performance for 30 seconds. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they turned away and headed south. Whatever that American was doing, they wanted no part of it. Above him or below him, depending on which 8-second interval you measured, the Oscar pilots were already composing their after-action reports. They would describe an enemy fighter that refused to die, that flew in ways that defied logic, that attacked from impossible angles and disappeared before they could respond. They would report encountering multiple American aircraft, 4, maybe 5, possibly more, coordinated attacks, aggressive tactics, a well-defended airfield that was clearly more dangerous than intelligence had suggested. None of them would believe it was one airplane, one pilot, one man, flying so aggressively, so unpredictably that an entire formation had been convinced they were facing a squadron. But that realization would come later. Right now they were climbing to altitude and heading home, already planning how to word their reports to minimize the embarrassment. Kellerman did not know any of that. He just knew he had to keep flipping. Inverted. Upright. Inverted. Upright. The rhythm became automatic. His hands moved on the stick without conscious thought. Roll left. Wait. Roll right. Wait. 28 miles to Dingen. 13 minutes of flight time at current speed. But current speed was not the problem. The problem was the engine, which was now running on fumes hope, and some kind of mechanical stubbornness that the engineers at Allison would have found fascinating if they were not already filing lawsuits over the abuse. Oil pressure hit 0. 0 is not a warning. 0 is an obituary. 0 means the bearings of dry metal is grinding on metal, and catastrophic failure is measuring itself in seconds, not minutes. The propeller kept turning. It should not have. By every law of thermodynamics and metallurgy, the engine should have seized solid. But it kept running, grinding, screaming, destroying itself one revolution at a time. Kellerman flipped inverted again. Blood rushed to his head. Vision grayed. He counted to 8. Rolled upright. Vision cleared. Counted to 6. Flipped inverted. The world became a metronome. 8 seconds of agony. 6 seconds of relief. Repeat until something broke, or the runway appeared, whichever came first. Carbon monoxide was creeping into the equation now. The cockpit ventilation system was designed to pull fresh air from outside and exhaust fumes away from the pilot. But with the canopy open and the engine burning, oil exhaust gases were swirling into the cockpit with every breath. Carbon monoxide is invisible, odorless, and it binds to hemoglobin 200 times more effectively than oxygen. Every breath Kellerman took was replacing oxygen in his blood with poison. The symptoms started subtle: a slight headache, mild nausea, nothing alarming, just background noise in a cockpit already full of alarms. But carbon monoxide does not stay subtle. It accumulates. At 5% saturation, you get a headache. At 10%, nausea and dizziness. At 20%, unconsciousness. At 30%, death. Kellerman was at minute 7 of inverted flight breathing exhaust fumes, and his blood saturation was climbing past 15%. He did not know the number. He just knew his vision was starting to tunnel even during the upright intervals. His hands felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Time was stretching and compressing in strange ways. 8 seconds inverted felt like 30. 6 seconds upright felt like 2. His inner ear was lying to him, telling him he was in a spin when he was flying straight. The horizon was doing things horizons were not supposed to do. Up and down were becoming negotiable concepts. But muscle memory is a powerful thing. His hands kept moving. Roll, wait, roll, wait. The P-40 kept flying or falling with style depending on your definition of controlled flight. 20 miles to Dinjan, altitude 3,200 feet, rate of descent averaging 600 feet per minute. That gave him 5 minutes before he ran out of sky. The engine temperature was now academic. The gauge was gone. The engine was either running or it was not. Kellerman could feel the heat radiating through the firewall, could smell burning paint vaporizing oil metal, oxidizing at temperatures that would make a blacksmith nervous. Then the propeller stopped. Not slowed. One moment it was windmilling, barely turning, grinding on dry bearings. The next moment it froze solid. 2 blades, locked horizontal. Dead. The engine had finally given up. Seized. Done. No amount of abuse would make it turn over again. The crankshaft was welded to the block. The pistons were expanded into the cylinder walls. Iron Maiden's heart had stopped. Kellerman was flying a glider now, a very bad glider with a weight-to-lift ratio that would make any sailplane pilot weep. 18 miles to Dinjan, altitude 2,800 feet, no engine, no power, just gravity and momentum. The P-40's glide ratio was 8-to-1 on a good day with a clean airframe. That meant for every 8 feet forward, he lost 1 foot of altitude. With battle damage, the ratio was worse. Maybe 6-to-1, maybe 5-to-1 with all the holes punched through the fuselage, disrupting airflow. Kellerman did the math. 2,800 feet of altitude, divide by 6. That gave him 2.8 miles of gliding distance. Maybe 3 if he was very gentle with the controls and the wind cooperated. He needed 18 miles. The math was not just discouraging now, it was terminal. But Kellerman kept flipping. Inverted for 8 seconds, upright for 6, because stopping meant falling and falling meant dying, and dying meant those 14 C-47s on the ground were not worth the effort. 15 miles to Dinjan, altitude 2,200 feet. The jungle canopy was close enough now that he could see individual trees, could pick out clearings, could identify the river snaking through the valley like a silver thread. His vision was tunneling hard now. The carbon monoxide saturation in his blood was past 20%. Medical textbooks said unconsciousness was imminent, but medical textbooks did not account for adrenaline, willpower, and the stubborn refusal to quit that runs deep in certain people. Kellerman's hands kept moving. Roll, wait. His breathing was shallow. His heart rate was through the roof. His body was screaming for oxygen and getting poison instead, but his hands kept moving. 12 miles to Dinjan, altitude 1,800 feet. He could see the airfield now, a brown scar in the green jungle, could see the runway, could see tiny figures on the ground probably watching him and wondering why an airplane was flying upside down with its propeller stopped. McBride would be down there. watching through binoculars, probably already knowing this was not going to end well, probably already calling for the meat wagon and the fire crew. 9 miles to go, altitude 1,400 feet, still flipping, still flying, still refusing to accept that the math said this was impossible. The carbon monoxide was winning now. Kellerman's vision was down to a narrow tunnel. His hearing was muffled like someone had stuffed cotton in his ears. His sense of time was completely gone. He might have been flying for hours, might have been flying for seconds. There was no way to tell. But his hands kept moving. 6 miles, altitude 1,000 feet. The runway was clearly visible now. He could see the control tower, could see trucks moving on the taxiways, could see the 14 C-47s, still intact, still whole, worth every second of the 17 minutes of combat and the 9 minutes of inverted insanity that had followed. 4 miles, altitude 700 feet. The P-40 was barely flying now. Airspeed had bled down to 125 miles per hour, just 15 miles per hour above stall speed. Any slower, and the wings would stop generating lift, and the airplane would drop like a brick. Kellerman stopped flipping. There was no point anymore. He was too low. Rolling inverted would put him into the trees. He flew upright, accepted the descent, and aimed for the runway. 2 miles, altitude 400 feet. The trees were close enough to see individual leaves. The river was below him, muddy and brown. If he could just make it over the river, he would be in gliding distance of the field. The P-40 crossed the river at 200 feet. The engine was cold now. The propeller blades were locked. The airframe was Swiss cheese. The controls were more suggestion than command, but it was still flying. 1 mile, altitude 300 feet. Kellerman could see people running on the airfield, could see vehicles moving toward the runway. McBride would be with them already knowing what was coming. 1/2 mile, altitude 200 feet. The P-40 was sinking fast now, trading every foot of altitude for every 8 feet of forward motion. The math was cutting it close, very close. Kellerman aimed for the near end of the runway, not the middle, not the far end, the very near end, because he did not have altitude to spare. The runway threshold approached. Kellerman was at 120 feet, descending 600 feet per minute. 4 seconds later, the wheels would hit, if he was lucky, if the gear held, if the airplane did not cartwheel. If a dozen other things went right that had no business going right. The P-40 crossed the threshold at 90 feet, descending hard, too fast, too steep. Kellerman pulled back on the stick, trying to flare, trying to bleed off speed, trying to make this look like a landing instead of a controlled crash. The stick responded. Barely. The nose came up slightly. The descent slowed from catastrophic to merely dangerous. The main wheels hit the concrete, hard. 7 Gs slammed through the airframe. Metal screamed. The gear struts compressed so fast they bottomed out against the stops. The tires, which had not been designed for this kind of impact, flexed, bulged, but somehow held. For 2 seconds it looked like Kellerman might actually pull this off. Then the right main gear collapsed. The strut, which had taken a round through the hydraulic cylinder 11 minutes earlier, finally gave up. The leg folded sideways. The right wing dropped. The wingtip struck the concrete in a shower of sparks. The P-40 spun, yawed hard right. The tail came around. The airplane was traveling backward at 60 miles per hour, scraping metal, throwing sparks, leaving a 200-foot scar across the runway. Then it stopped. Silence. Just the sound of wind. The creak of stressed metal. The drip of fluids onto hot concrete. Kellerman did not move. He hung in the straps, head down, vision, grey breath, shallow. The carbon monoxide saturation in his blood was 38%. Medical science said he should have been unconscious 10 minutes ago. Should have been dead 5 minutes ago. But Kellerman was still breathing, still conscious, still alive. He reached up with hands that did not quite belong to him and unbuckled the harness. The straps released. He stood up on the seat legs, shaking, and climbed out onto the wing. His legs gave out immediately. He fell. Did not even try to catch himself. Master Sergeant Wallace McBride caught him before gravity could finish the job. Strong hands under the arms, a Scottish accent saying something Kellerman could not quite hear through the ringing in his ears. The ground crew arrived. Someone grabbed his other arm. Someone else was yelling for a medic. Kellerman did not hear most of it. His ears rang. The world felt slow, distant, like he was watching it through thick glass. He looked back at Iron Maiden, at what was left of her. The engine cowling was peeled back like a banana. The engine itself was a ruin, pistons seized, crankshaft warped, coolant and oil everywhere. The Allison 5-1710 had not just failed. It had sacrificed itself with enthusiasm. The fuselage looked like someone had gone at it with a hole punch. 16 rounds through the body, 11 more in the wings, control cables cut clean through. 1 round had missed Kellerman's head by 3 inches. The seat back had a hole in it that would have been a headrest if Kellerman had been sitting 2 inches farther back. The right wing was crumpled where it had struck the runway. The landing gear was pretzel. The propeller blades were bent. The tail wheel was gone entirely. Iron Maiden would never fly again. Kellerman nodded at the wreck like it had personally apologized to him. Fair enough. She had gotten him home. That was all anyone could ask. McBride's voice cut through the fog. "Laddie, can you hear me?" Kellerman nodded. "Did any bombs hit the field?" Kellerman shook his head. "The transports." "Safe," Kellerman managed. His voice sounded strange, distant. "All safe." McBride looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the wreck, then back at Kellerman. "You just flew 40 miles on a dead engine upside down with no controls and landed without killing yourself." "Mostly landed," Kellerman corrected. "Aye, mostly." The medics arrived with a stretcher. Kellerman waved them off. "I can walk." He could not walk. His legs folded after 2 steps. The medics caught him and laid him on the stretcher anyway. As they carried him toward the ambulance, Kellerman looked up at the sky. Clear, blue, empty. The Japanese were gone. The airfield was intact. The C-47s were still parked in neat rows, untouched. Mission accomplished. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. Not death, just exhaustion. His body finally cashing the check his willpower had been writing for the last 26 minutes. Behind him, McBride stood by the wreck of Iron Maiden, one hand on the torn metal, and whispered something in Gaelic that translated roughly to a prayer for machines that give more than they should and pilots too stubborn to quit. Kellerman woke up 3 days later in a hospital tent that smelled like disinfectant and canvas. His head felt like someone had filled it with wet concrete. His throat was raw. Every breath tasted like copper and ash. The light hurt. Sound hurt. Existing hurt. A medical officer sat beside the cot reading a chart with the kind of expression doctors reserve for patients who should be in the morgue. Captain Richard Howell, 42 years old, Philadelphia Medical College, 20 years of practice. He had seen men survive impossible things before, but this was different. He looked up when Kellerman's eyes opened. "Welcome back, Lieutenant. You've been unconscious for 68 hours. Kellerman tried to speak. His voice came out as a rasp that barely qualified as language. "The transports, not where am I or what happened or am I going to die, just the transports." Howell had seen enough wounded men to recognize what mattered to them. "Still there, all 14. Not a single bomb touched Dinjan. Your crew chief said you can see them from here if you can sit up." Kellerman tried, failed. His body had different opinions about vertical. Howell put a hand on his shoulder. "Give it time. Your muscles are still remembering how to work." "How bad?" Howell set the chart down and leaned back in his chair. This was the conversation he had been dreading. "We drew blood when they brought you in. Standard procedure for smoke inhalation. Your carbon monoxide saturation was 38%. The number meant nothing to Kellerman. His brain was still booting up. 25% is unconsciousness, Howell continued. 30% is considered fatal. You flew for at least 9 minutes past the threshold where medical science says the human brain shuts down. Then you landed an airplane with no engine-severed control cables and blood oxygen levels that should have killed you in your seat. Man, Howell picked up the chart again, stared at it like it was lying to him. "I wrote it all down. Nobody's going to believe it. Half of me doesn't believe it, and I took the blood myself, but I wrote it down." Kellerman's vision was starting to focus. He could see the tent canvas, could see medical equipment, could see other cots with other wounded men, most of them unconscious, or staring at nothing. "Did we get them?" he asked. The bombers bowed. Intelligence counted 3 confirmed destroyed. The rest scattered and aborted. The formation never reformed. Howell paused. You want to know the interesting part? Kellerman waited. The Japanese filed after-action reports. We intercepted radio traffic before they could encode it properly. Their pilots reported encountering 4 to 5 American fighters conducting coordinated diving attacks from multiple vectors. Kellerman blinked. His brain was still moving slowly. 4 or 5? They thought you were a squadron. One P-40 attacking so fast from so many angles they couldn't count you. They logged it as a coordinated defensive operation. Howell almost smiled. Japanese command bought it completely, issued new tactical directives for all operations in the Assam sector. Double escort strength, higher altitude approach, avoid areas with aggressive fighter patrols. They pushed back all planned attacks on Dinjan and surrounding airfields by 6 weeks minimum. 6 weeks. That meant the Hump airlift would run uninterrupted through the critical supply period. China would hold, the theater would stabilize, hundreds of missions, thousands of tons of supplies, all because 64 enemy aircraft had convinced themselves they were facing a squadron instead of one beat-up P-40 that refused to die. "Get some rest," Howell said, standing. "General Stilwell wants to see you when you're vertical, and Lieutenant—" He paused at the tent flap. "What you did up there, that wasn't courage. Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. What you did was something else, something I don't have a word for, but I'm glad you're on our side." Kellerman slept. When he woke the second time, the concrete in his head had downgraded to wet sand. Progress. Master Sergeant Wallace McBride sat in the chair Howell had vacated, thermos of coffee in his hands, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard look of a man who had watched too many pilots not come back. "Laddie," McBride said quietly, "you awake for real this time? How bad is she?" McBride knew immediately what she meant. He had been dreading this conversation. "Total loss." Chief Inspector looked her over, took measurements, counted damage. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the official damage assessment. 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 11 in the wings, 7.62 mm and 12.7 mm rounds. Aileron control cables severed, elevator cables 80% cut through. Oil system breached in 3 places. Coolant system completely destroyed. Crankshaft warped 0.8 inches out of true. Pistons welded to cylinder walls from thermal expansion. He stopped, took a breath. The landing gear hydraulic cylinder had a round through it. That's why the right strut collapsed. The propeller took a hit from ground strike. One blade's bent 30 degrees. The airframe's stressed beyond all repair limits. Metal fatigue cracks in the wing spars. Fuselage buckled from the spin. "Can you fix her?" McBride was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 20 years keeping airplanes alive. Sun Iron Maiden flew 40 miles with 0 oil pressure. 0. The engine should have seized solid in 90 seconds. It ran for 9 minutes. She flew with coolant temperatures that would melt aluminum. She flew inverted when the controls were cut. She landed on one gear leg and didn't cartwheel. He unfolded the paper, showed Kellerman the bottom line. Disposition beyond economical repair. Recommend salvage for parts. She gave you everything she had and then borrowed from tomorrow to give you more. But there's nothing left to give. The last flight killed her. McBride refolded the paper carefully. "I wrote the final entry in her logbook. Tail number 227, Iron Maiden. Gave her life for 280 men. A fair trade." They sat in silence. Outside, the airfield continued. Engines starting, crews shouting, transports taking off. The war did not pause for one wrecked airplane or one grounded pilot. "The Oscars that followed you home," McBride said eventually. "The ones that watched you flip all the way back. Tower observer said one of them waggled his wings before the formation turned south. What's that mean? Respect, probably. Salute. Even the enemy recognizes the extraordinary when they see it." Oh man, McBride poured coffee into a tin cup, handed it to Kellerman. "You did something up there that's going to be talked about for a very long time. One airplane, 64 enemies. You made them think you were a squadron. You saved 280 lives. You changed Japanese tactical doctrine for an entire theater." He paused. "And you broke every rule in the book doing it. Will I fly again?" "Aye. Medical says another week grounded. Carbon monoxide damage needs to heal, but you'll fly." McBride stood. "General's coming tomorrow at 1000. You'll want to be standing for that. Polish your boots. He's a stickler. Kellerman stood the next morning. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but they held. A nurse had found him a clean uniform. The brass was polished. He looked like an officer instead of a medical casualty. Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell arrived at exactly 1000 hours, 60 years old, commander of all American forces in the China-Burma-India theater, known as Vinegar Joe for his disposition and his complete inability to tolerate incompetence. He walked into the hospital tent like he owned the ground it sat on. Kellerman saluted. His arm shook slightly, but it went up straight. Stilwell returned it crisply. Then he looked at Kellerman the way a mechanic looks at an engine that shouldn't run but does anyway. Cataloguing, assessing, understanding. "At ease, Lieutenant." Kellerman dropped the salute, but remained standing. Stilwell pulled a small leather box from his pocket. "I read the after-action reports. Yours, your crew chiefs, the tower controllers, the British radar station, even pulled the radio intercepts from the Japanese formation." He opened the box. Inside was a silver star, the bronze and enamel ribbon catching the morning light. The official citation uses words like gallantry, extraordinary heroism, conspicuous, disregard for personal safety. Standard medal language makes it sound like you followed some kind of doctrine. He lifted the medal out. But we both know you didn't follow doctrine. Doctrine says disengage when outnumbered 5-1. You were outnumbered 64-1. Doctrine says preserve the aircraft. You destroyed it. Doctrine says survive to fight another day. You fought past the point where survival was likely. Stilwell pinned the medal to Kellerman's chest. The weight of it was surprisingly heavy. "What you did was not by the book. It was against the book. You saw a job that needed doing, and you did it. No backup, no plan, just one decision followed by 17 minutes of violence and 9 minutes of flying that defies aeronautical engineering." He stepped back. "The Army Air Forces thanks you. The 280 men on those C-47s thank you. Chiang Kai-shek's army thanks you, though they'll never know your name. I thank you." Stilwell's expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes changed. "Now I'm going to ask you something, and I want the truth. What were you thinking when you decided to attack?" Kellerman thought about it. The question deserved honesty. "I wasn't thinking about attacking, sir. I was thinking about what would happen if I didn't. 14 transports, 280 wounded men, the fuel depot, the hump airlift, all of it gone if those bombers got through." He paused. "I was thinking I was the only one who could stop them, so I had to try." Stilwell nodded slowly. "That's the right answer, not the heroic answer, the right one." He turned toward the tent entrance, then stopped. "You're grounded for 1 week. Medical orders non-negotiable. After that, you're back on the flight line. We need pilots who understand that duty doesn't calculate odds." He paused again. "One more thing. Japanese command delayed all raids on Assam sector airfields for 6 weeks, minimum. Intelligence intercepts show they're retooling their entire operational approach. More escorts, higher altitude, avoid engagement with what they believe are well-coordinated defensive fighter patrols." He almost smiled. It looked uncomfortable on his face. "They think Dinjan has significant air defense capabilities, multiple squadrons, aggressive tactics. Their intelligence officers are probably getting screamed at right now for missing it in their pre-mission assessments. Sir, it was 1 airplane. They don't know that, and we're not going to tell them." Stilwell's smile vanished. "Sometimes the most effective weapon is the enemy's imagination. You gave them a nightmare, Lieutenant. Let them keep it. Dismissed." He left. McBride, who had been standing at attention in the corner, walked over after the general's jeep drove away. "Congratulations, laddie. You're a certified war hero now." "I just flew the airplane." "Aye. Upside down, with no engine, for 9 minutes, after fighting 64 aircraft by yourself." McBride handed him a piece of paper. "This came through intelligence this morning. Thought you'd want to see it." Kellerman unfolded it. Typed transcript, radio intercept, Japanese transmission from December 13th, translated and declassified for tactical use. Intercepted transmission. 5th Air Division Source Major. Nakamura Hideaki Formation. Commander, time, 10:15 hours, December 13th, 1943. Mission to Dinjan Airfield, aborted due to unexpected enemy resistance. Formation encountered aggressive multi-aircraft defensive tactics, employing diving attacks from superior altitude. Estimate 4 to 5 enemy fighters, possibly more. Coordinated operations suggest well-trained, squadron-level defense. 3 bombers lost to accurate gunnery. Formation discipline compromised, unable to achieve bombing objectives. Recommend future operations require doubled escort strength and revised tactical approach. Dinjan defenses significantly more robust than intelligence indicated. Below it, a second intercept. Personal diary entry from a Japanese pilot recovered months later when he was killed in action over Imphal. The translation was rougher, more human. December 13th. The American at Dinjan haunts me. We thought there were many aircraft. The attacks came from everywhere. Above, behind, below. Never the same angle twice. Sato swears he saw the same airplane upside down, then right side up, then upside down again. Our eyes must have been lying. But when I close my eyes, I still see it. One fighter, just one, refusing to die, refusing to leave. Command says we faced a squadron. I think we faced something worse. A single pilot who would not quit. I do not want to fly over Dinjan again. Kellerman read both documents twice. Then he folded them carefully and handed them back to McBride. They really thought there were more. Mate, you attacked so fast from so many directions they couldn't track you. Human brain can't process chaos like that. They saw what they expected to see. Multiple aircraft, not one lunatic in a beat-up P-40, breaking every rule of engagement ever written. McBride tucked the papers away. Intelligence wants to keep this quiet. Let the Japanese keep thinking Dinjan's got a full fighter wing. Strategic deception without firing a shot. The week of medical rest became 8 days. Kellerman spent it sleeping, eating food that tasted like cardboard, and relearning how to walk without his vision tunneling. The carbon monoxide had done damage. His endurance was shot. 20 yards left him winded. The doctors said it would heal. Give it time. The body repairs itself. On the 9th day, Kellerman returned to the flight line. A new P-40 was waiting. Tail number 304. No nose art, no nickname, just fresh olive drab paint and the clean smell of an aircraft that had never seen combat. McBride was there running final pre-flight checks. He looked up when Kellerman approached. She's all yours, laddie. Full fuel, full ammo. Everything works like it's supposed to. Try not to break this one in the first 17 minutes. Kellerman climbed into the cockpit. The seat felt right. The controls felt familiar. The instrument panel was intact, all gauges where they belonged, all needles pointing at safe numbers. It was not Iron Maiden, but it would fly. He flew 95 more combat missions over the next 18 months. Bomber escorts over Burma, ground attack missions in support of British Indian forces, fighter sweeps hunting Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. He shot down 4 more enemy fighters, bringing his total to 7, ace status. The kind of numbers that got mentioned in Stars and Stripes. He never flew another mission, like December 13th, 1943. Nothing else required flying inverted for 9 minutes. Nothing else involved landing with a dead engine and severed controls. Nothing else pitted one aircraft against 64. But every mission, every takeoff, every landing, he carried the weight of it. The 14 C-47s, the 280 wounded soldiers who made it home, the Japanese formation that scattered because one pilot decided impossible odds were just another problem to solve. The war ended in August 1945. Japan surrendered. Kellerman rotated stateside in October. He was 25 years old. 7 aerial victories, Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the kind of record that opened doors. He stayed in the Army Air Forces. The service needed experienced combat pilots to train the next generation. He made captain in 1946, major in 1950. The Army Air Forces became the United States Air Force in 1947, and Kellerman went with it. He flew desks after that, training commands, safety inspection boards, administrative assignments that kept him in uniform. But out of cockpits, he was good at it, teaching young pilots not to make the mistakes that killed the men he had served with, reviewing accident reports, writing doctrine. He retired in 1968 as a full colonel. 25 years of service, 2 wars, hundreds of missions. He had done his part. He moved back to Dayton, Ohio, bought a small house 3 miles from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, close enough to hear the jets, but far enough that the noise didn't keep him awake. He got a job as a civilian flight instructor at the local airport. Cessnas and Pipers. teaching businessmen and teenagers how to fly patterns and handle crosswinds. His students never knew. The quiet man in his 50s who taught them turns around a point and emergency procedures had once fought 64 enemy aircraft alone and won. He never mentioned it, never wore his medals to work. It was just another day 40 years ago. When journalists found him in the 1970s asking about Dinjan, asking about the Silver Star, asking about the mission where one P-40 held off an entire Japanese formation, he gave them all the same answer. I did my job. Iron Maiden did the heavy lifting. Sergeant McBride kept her alive past all reasonable limits. I just held the stick and tried not to crash. They pressed him about the inverted flight, the carbon monoxide, the mathematical impossibility of surviving. He shrugged. Some days you're the only one standing between chaos and order. You do what needs doing. The airplane either holds together or it doesn't. That day she held together, that's all. He lived quietly, never wrote a memoir, never gave speeches. When the Air Force Association asked him to speak at their annual convention in 1985, he politely declined. The past was past. Let it stay there. He died in March 2001, 81 years old, heart failure in his sleep. The kind of death most combat pilots never get. Peaceful, quiet, at home. The funeral was held at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Full military honors, flag-draped coffin, 7-rifle salute, taps played by a young airman who had never heard of Dinjan but knew every note by heart. The pallbearers were 6 men in their 80s, fragile, grey, moving slowly. But they came, they carried him, they owed him that much. They had all been on those 14 C-47 transports on December 13th, 1943. Wounded soldiers strapped into cargo planes waiting for Japanese bombs that never fell because one pilot decided their lives were worth 17 minutes of impossible courage. Master Sergeant Wallace McBride attended, 103 years old, flew from Scotland specifically for this. He needed a cane. His hands shook, but his voice still carried that thick Glasgow rumble that could cut through jet engine noise. At the graveside, after the rifle volley and the folded flag and the formal words, McBride stood and spoke. That laddie taught me something in December of 43. He taught me the difference between machines and men. His voice wavered slightly. Machines obey physics. They follow the rules. They break when they're supposed to break. They quit when the math says quit. Men are different. Men obey something higher, duty, honor, love, the stubborn refusal to abandon the people counting on you. McBride looked at the coffin. Iron Maiden flew 40 miles with no oil, no coolant, temperatures that should have turned her engine into slag. She flew inverted, she landed on one gear. She did impossible things because the man flying her needed impossible things done. And when it was over, when she'd given everything and borrowed from tomorrow, she quit. But not before, never before the job was done. He paused, gathered himself. Dwight Kellerman looked at 64 enemy aircraft and decided 280 American soldiers mattered more than his own life. He flew past unconsciousness, past reason, past the point where survival was likely, and he brought them home. All of them. Not a single bomb fell on Dinjan that day. Not one. McBride's voice broke. I've kept aircraft flying for 40 years, fixed thousands of problems, saved hundreds of pilots. But I never saw anything like what happened that day. One man, one machine, one decision that changed everything. He stepped back. Rest easy, laddie. The job's done. You can quit now. They buried Colonel Dwight Kellerman in the Veterans Cemetery at Wright-Patterson, Section 7, Row 12, Plot 47. The headstone is simple grey granite. Name, rank, dates of service. Below that one line, Silver Star. December 13th, 1943, Dinjan. Nothing else, no quote, no embellishment, just the facts. The story should end there, clean, complete, hero, buried with honors. But stories don't end when bodies go in the ground. They end when the last person who remembers stops telling it. In 2018, 75 years after Dinjan, a Japanese veteran named Sato Hiroshi attended a reconciliation ceremony in Tokyo. He was 94 years old, thin, frail, but his memory was sharp. An American historian was there collecting oral histories for a documentary on the Burma campaign. He asked Sato about his experiences, the missions he remembered. Sato was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke in careful, precise English. There was one mission, December 1943. We were supposed to bomb an American airfield called Dinjan. We had 24 bombers, 40 fighters, 64 aircraft total. We thought it would be easy. Intelligence said minimal defenses. We thought we would drop our bombs and be home for lunch. He stopped, looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly. But there was an American. We thought there were many Americans, many fighters. They attacked from above, from below, from behind. Never the same angle twice. Our formation broke apart. We could not count them. Our commander reported 4 or 5 enemy aircraft, maybe more. Sato looked up. His eyes were wet. But I saw him. I counted. It was one airplane, just one. One pilot who would not stop, would not run, would not die. He attacked us for 17 minutes. 17 minutes of violence. We turned back. We did not drop our bombs. We told our commanders it was too dangerous. They believed us. Another pause. We changed our entire strategy because of one man, one airplane. We delayed operations for weeks, increased escorts, revised tactics, all because one American made us believe we were facing an army. The historian asked gently, "Did you ever learn his name?" "No. I tried to find out after the war, but I never knew." Sato's voice dropped. "I want to say, thank you. He taught me that courage is not about numbers or advantage. It is about refusing to quit when quitting makes sense. He was the bravest enemy I ever faced. I hope he survived the war. I hope he lived a long life. He earned it." The historian told him. Dwight Kellerman died 2001. Sato bowed his head and was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Tell his family I remember. Tell them he was not just brave, he was extraordinary, and I will carry the memory of what he did until the day I die." That conversation was recorded, archived, added to the historical record at the National World War II Museum. One more voice confirming what happened on December 13th, 1943. One P-40 Warhawk, one pilot, 64 enemy aircraft that turned around and never came back. 280 American soldiers who lived because one man decided their lives mattered more than his own. The math said it was impossible. The doctrine said disengage. Common sense said run. Duty said hold the line. Dwight Kellerman held the line. Iron Maiden gave everything she had. Wallace McBride kept the engine alive past all engineering limits. Together they proved that impossible is just another problem waiting for someone stubborn enough to solve it. 80 years later we remember, not because it makes sense, not because it fits into doctrine, not because it should have worked. We remember because it did work. Because one man looked at impossible odds and said no. No to retreat, no to surrender, no to the ending that was supposed to happen. December 13th, 1943, 09:27 hours, 12,000 feet above Assam Valley. One decision that saved hundreds of lives and changed the course of a war. The story doesn't end with medals or graves or ceremonies. It ends with this. Somewhere in America there are families who exist because their grandfather was on a C-47 transport at Dinjan on December 13th, 1943. Children who were born because their father made it home from Burma. Grandchildren who will never know they owe their existence to 17 minutes of impossible courage. They will never know Dwight Kellerman's name. They will never visit his grave. They will never understand that their entire family tree exists because one pilot decided to attack instead of retreat. But they exist, and that is enough. That is the victory that matters, not the medals, not the recognition, not the records or the citations or the after-action reports, the lives that continued, the families that grew, the futures that unfolded because one man held the line when the math said to run. If this story moved you, share it. Not for glory, not for recognition, but to remember that heroism is not about being unafraid. It is about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Share it so the next generation understands that duty does not calculate odds. Duty does not count enemies. Duty asks one question, what needs to be done, and then it does the work. December 13th, 1943. One P-40, one pilot. Impossible odds. Dwight Kellerman looked at those odds and said, not today. Iron Maiden flew past her limits and said, not yet. Wallace McBride kept the engine alive and said, not while I'm breathing. Together they said no to the ending that was supposed to happen. And 280 American soldiers said thank you by living the lives they almost lost. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is why we remember. Not because it was easy, because it was impossible, and someone did it anyway.